In this video, I'll be doing a step-by-step naturalistic bioactive vivarium build. This is a 12 by 12 by 18 high exoterra. One of the first things I do is remove the styrofoam background that comes with it. To start, I'm going to map out some of the cork bark. I'm using a black Sharpie to mark the glass so I can put the wood in its place later. I'm going to mark up the back of the cork bark so I can drill it out. This is so I can fit more ABG mix and use the back of the cork bark as a planter. Mapping out some ideas on where I can put another plant holder. I'm putting twist ties in the hole in the front opening doors, and then putting rope through the twist ties so the doors don't snap off. Lining up the cork bark with the marks I made earlier. Then using great stuff, gaps and cracks to start spray foaming it in. Make sure you leave some space between the bottom of the enclosure and the background to adjust for the depth of the substrate you'll add later. I found it best to lay the foam by going around objects and also a back and forth motion. When adding plant holders, stick it in the wet foam and then just spray foam over the top. The foam needs about 24 hours to cure. If you use the lid to the great stuff can, make sure you drill holes in the bottom. Here, I knew I was going to want to add a cave, so I just started adding layers of great stuff. I'm going to start building up the back side of the cave using more spray foam. It's important to build it up layer by layer so everything cures. If you don't add it in layers and apply it too thick, when you go to cut into it, it'll most likely ooze out. Once it's cured, go ahead and add another layer. Now I'm just sketching out where I want the hole in my cave to go. Once you have an idea on how you want it to look, start cutting it out. If you use a drill for the deeper areas, make sure you go slow and take your time. You can also use a wire brush bit on the end of the drill. Now that I have an idea on how it's coming together, I'm going to start placing some wood in different spots to see what I like. I really liked how this piece of spiderwood flowed with what I have so far, but with this being a smaller build and grow out tank, I thought it best to use something with more surface area. So I decided to remove it, not for myself, but for the reptile that'll be going in it. This process can sometimes take some time, but it's worth it in the long run. This cork bark round flows with the vision I had for this particular build, and also maximizes the surface area. To tack it in place with a temporary hold, I'll just use a little bit of hot glue. Now to finish foaming in the left side underneath the cave. Once the foam is cured, you want to make sure you go around the whole thing and cut off the outer layer, so all the shiny stuff is removed. I usually just use my fingers to tear it off. marking out my pattern so I can cut a hole into the cork bark to create another hide. Once I have a hole, I'll try to pick at it to create a more natural look. Creating another entry point towards the back. I did glue this piece of wood on here so I can secure it with foam later. Using some more hot glue to mock up the right side wall using more cork bark. Foaming in the last and final wall. I'll be using dry lock in the cave area to make it look like naturalistic fake rock. Make sure you get the original. I found cutting off the ends of a paintbrush allow you to apply dry lock a little bit easier. When applying your first coat, you really want to work it into all the crevices and pores. This process is more of a dabbing rather than a painting. It's a good idea to cover up anything you don't want dry lock on, just in case it splatters or drips. I'll be adding a little bit of Quikrete charcoal color for my second layer. I like using different colored tones so I can see exactly where I need to apply it. Now that the right side foam is cured, I'm going to start sketching it and carving it. Once again, make sure you get the outer, shiny, smooth surface off so dry lock or silicone will stick to the foam. Now I'll catch the right side up with the dry lock process. I went ahead and added my third and fourth coat, ending with the darkest color possible. I'm getting ready to set up my palette for dry brushing. Using Quikrete and dry lock to create a couple of different tones will make the naturalistic fake rock come together. Once again, my last coat was in the darkest color. This is to simulate a shadow for when we start the dry brush. I'm just putting a very small amount on the tips of the paintbrush. Next, I'm removing the majority of the dry lock by simply using a paper plate. I start with my darkest tones first and then move to my lighter tones. By lightly and gently touching the surface of the area with the paintbrush, it's going to start highlighting the high points. Here, I'm moving on to the lightest tone that I have. With the lightest tone, hitting the peaks of the surface will give it the worn and weathered look. Next up is silicone, orchid bark, and cocoa fiber. When using silicone, make sure it's 100% silicone and does not have any mold inhibitors. If you did all 3 walls like this build, do 1 wall at a time. You can be generous with the silicone, making sure you get all of the spray foam. Once you have a good base, go ahead and smear it all together. While the silicone is still wet, go ahead and add some orchid bark. This helps for climbing surfaces. I usually place it every 2 to 3 inches. Now to add the cocoa fiber, making sure I cover up all the wet silicone. Once it's completely covered, I just go ahead and push it all down into the silicone. I use brown silicone instead of clear just in case some of the cocoa fiber comes off. That way you won't see any foam sticking through. Once it's been an hour or so, I stand the tank upright and knock off any loose cocoa fiber. I remove the excess cocoa fiber so I can use it again. After 24 hours, I use a shop vac to get the rest of it. To clean up the edges of the dry lock and silicone, I use a variety of different X-Acto knives. I cut about 1/8 of an inch away from the hardscape background. I then take a flat razor to clean it up. You can also take a flat razor to get off any dry lock, silicone, or spray foam that you got on the glass. I like to use a new razor whenever I'm doing this. After 48 hours, I give it a good spray down. I use distilled water to prevent watermarks on the glass. Here's some quick pictures of the hardscape completed. I'll use an acrylic paint to paint the outside of the Exoterra. Now to add hydro balls. What I didn't show was putting the hydro balls into a Ziploc bag, putting holes in the bottom of the bag, and running water through the Ziploc bag to wash out any dust. For this part of the drainage layer, you want about 1.5 to 2 inches. Make sure you spread it out evenly. This is for excess water to go, beneficial bacteria to grow, and prevent your substrate from getting waterlogged. I'll be using weed barrier to go on top of the hydro balls. I took the top to the lid and cut about 1 inch around it. This is going to act as a barrier so my ABG mix substrate doesn't go into the hydro balls. When using ABG mix, I mix it up in a storage container. I'll be using Pangea's ABG mix, which is a precise blend of tree fern fiber, charcoal, sphagnum peat moss, long fiber sphagnum moss, and fir bark. To start, I spread it out evenly. Then I add some more to build up the back to create some depth and draw the eye to the back of the enclosure. I figured I'd dry brush the food dish to match the fake rock I made earlier. This is the back of the enclosure where I drilled out the cork bark so I can fit some more ABG mix for planting some plants. I left this part unpainted so I can see how the plants are taking root. I definitely don't have a green thumb, but this hobby has taught me a lot. It's important to me to use real plants over artificial plants. I feel like it benefits the reptile much more. I chose to go with golden pothos here in hopes that it would canopy and add more foliage. Adding some snake plants, one in the back where there's a little bit of light peeking through, and one right here in the front. When adding air plants, I just put a little bit of Gorilla Glue, the gel kind, and hold it for about a minute and a half. Time to add some botanicals. I'll be using seed pod spoons, dark nut pods, ram's head pods, magnolia leaves, and cork bark pieces. These are great for a couple different reasons. One, it adds some extra aesthetics, and two, it's great for your cleanup crew. To make this enclosure bioactive, I'm going to add my microfauna. To start, I'll use springtails as part of the cleanup crew. Next, I'll add powder orange and powder blue isopods. It's a good idea to keep a couple cultures going so you can seed as needed. After letting the tank sit for about 3 weeks, it's finally time to go ahead and add my gargoyle gecko. He's been in a quarantine enclosure for the last 2 months, currently weighing in at about 7 grams. This enclosure here is going to be his grow out tank. Like and subscribe. Check out the link above to see another video on how this paludarium was built. In the video, I'll go over some of these features. How I built the pond area, custom screen lid and glass top, along with built-in air ducts and how it operates, the plumbing for the built-in fogger, with some of the inhabitants, plus a lot more tips and tricks.